I appreciate it. Well, good morning, Sean and Christina. Great to have you. Look forward to an awesome discussion. For those who are tuning in online, as Justin said, we'll have a conversation about leadership styles, and then unpacking personas of successful leaders. So we have quite a bit to cover. We know that startup founders often find that the skills required to scale their business aren't the same as those required to start it. And as their teams grow, financials become increasingly complex, strategic decisions become more significant, and pivots become more painful. And so how can CEOs and leaders ensure that their growth as leaders is on pace with that of their companies? And so in this conversation, this discussion today, we will cover and unpack quite a bit, but mainly we'll be with Christina and Sean discussing the different styles of startup leaders, where different leadership personas excel and where they struggle, what support these personas need in order to succeed, and how to figure out which one is the best leadership styles for you. Right? I'm, as an early stage founder, trying to figure that out. And that's why I'm personally very, very interested in having a conversation this morning with Sean and Christina. And so with that, I think the first thing we should do is do quick intros, and then we'll dive into some of the questions around leaderships and the different personas. So Sean, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Maddie.
Great.
And thanks everybody who's here. Super excited to get a chance to speak on this topic. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Eager Labs. We provide leadership learning programs, live, online, interactive, and collaborative learning programs for leaders and managers and scaling companies. My background is all technology companies in the Boston area over the last 20 plus years, 8 different startups, a bunch of different exit events and opportunities to provide advising, mentoring. I've had board roles at startups. I ran a mentoring program for new entrepreneurs. And through the work I do at Eager Labs, I get to teach and train and coach brand new managers up through seasoned executives every day of the week. I love what I do. I'm really excited for the Q&A. Please don't be shy with your questions. And one of my sort of core values is to be irrationally helpful. So if there's any way that I can be helpful to anyone who's here today, either during the session or afterwards, I'm very easy to find online. Please reach out and let me know.
Thank you, Sean. Christina?
Thank you. I echo Sean. It's such a pleasure to be here. Very much looking forward to our discussion. So I'm an International Coaching Federation certified coach, and I currently serve as the Chief Financial and People Officer for Impeccable. And we are a human-centric digital product agency. I started my career in finance and strategy consulting and really pivoted towards the operations and people side when I had the aha moment. So multitude of industries, a lot of it in food and beverage, opening restaurants, helping small businesses scale. So my aha moment was, hey, if I put the right people in the right places, nurturing and supporting their growth, that was the magic sauce of creating amazing organizations. And once I had that epiphany, that's all I ever wanted to do, was to create that environment where people can grow, succeed, and lead to a great company.
Oh, thank you, Christina. And that's wonderful. Sean, I haven't started 8 companies. This is my second one, and the first one failed miserably. Mm-hmm. So hence my excitement about this session. So let's dive into it, right? And given that this is a session about talking about different leadership styles, the first thing we want to do is really understand how you describe a leader. Who is a leader? What makes a leader? So how would you describe that? Sean?
Well, the first thing I would say is not to get too semantically bogged down here, but I make a distinction between leaders and managers. They are 2 different roles. Often the same person is playing both of those roles. But you can be a leader even as a junior person in an organization. If you are able to rally people to a cause or a purpose, if you're able to answer questions, provide direction, leadership can start very, very, very young. Or very early, I should say, in terms of your career and your experience. Some people come by it very naturally. We've all sort of heard the phrase natural born leader. But I also strongly believe that there are skills that anyone can learn to be more effective as a leader. Managers, more specifically, have direct responsibilities, organizational responsibilities, some structural and systemic responsibilities, which is more about sort of organization and delivering results. And that's why you can see there the Venn diagram often overlaps quite a bit. But to me, anyone who is excited about an objective and can rally people towards working on that objective and delivering a result is providing some form of leadership. As a result of that, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I'll just plant the seed for our conversation that I actually, because of that, believe that anyone with any different personality type, any different set of characteristics can be a leader. When you think of that natural born leader, maybe you kind of think of the cheerleading leader, the one who rallies people and gets people pumped up and excited. But I would be, just as confident that someone who is maybe highly organized and very rigorous about creating to-do lists and delivering could learn the complementary skills to be a really effective leader over time.
Right. And Sean, I think my definition of a leader is probably on the other spectrum is, in general, a leader is someone I would willingly follow to achieve a goal or mission. And like you said, it's not dependent on certain characteristic traits, but it's someone who creates the space where I'm willing to follow what they're saying and what they're directing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, but there must be elements, right? Some particular elements that make a good leader. So, some might say integrity, honesty, right? Others might say clear focus and courage, or the ability to execute. They're all important, but in your mind, what are some of those core elements that are really important to be a good and effective leader?
For me, I think humility is huge. So I lump in humility and self-awareness, what I know, what I don't know. And then integrity is a really big factor. So what I know, what I don't know, and to be able to say, hey, I don't know this, how do I get people who know, or how do I get a group of people together that we can solve the problem?
I think communication is really critical, and that can mean different things. As I said, some people are natural cheerleaders, some people are very detail oriented, there may be mental processors, but you've got to be able to articulate to people the why for what you're asking them to do. And along the way, a million other moments of communication are going to happen where you provide direction or correction or feedback or whatever it may be. And if you struggle with communication, that's going to be really hard to overcome in total. You'll have to find some basic skills and techniques. And I, like Christina, I coach a lot of folks, and I run into people that communication is one of their challenges, and there are ways to mitigate those things. But I think that's probably one of the few immutable characteristics. I also like to see a form, and you mentioned humility, Christina. I think of it as empathy, which is the ability to sort of understand what other people are feeling and experiencing and how they're receiving what you're offering to them. The simplest way probably for a lot of folks here who are in the audience is, I say, when you're starting out as a leader or as a manager, just to stop and think for a moment. You probably did whatever that individual contributor role is before you were asked to be the manager of it. Don't forget what was hard about that job. Don't forget why it's stressful. I'm an engineer by trade, so I always am telling new engineering managers, don't forget why it's hard to be an engineer, because that will allow you as a leader to really connect and align your people to what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Right.
That's great, and I want to touch on this communication piece, Sean, because just to clear this, by communication, you're not specifically suggesting public speaking, because I have heard Mark Zuckerberg's public engagements or some other tech CEOs, and they're not very good at that. But is communication public speaking, or is communication in communicating to the team, the milestones, the values, the mission, the goals? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's lots of modalities, right? I mean, whether it's written communication, spoken word, group presentation style, I think the public speaking is my least important factor in all of this.
Hmm.
You know, there's the story when the company gets so big, you have to stand on a chair to run a company meeting. You do need to be able to speak to larger and larger audience as you grow. But I do think that in each of the other channels, for me, it's really just about being able to effectively and clearly communicate what the mission is, what the purpose is, what the steps are we're going to take to get there, and keep everyone aligned and moving in the same direction. Just briefly, to maybe take a different angle of it, Jocko Willink, who's a former SEAL team leader, is someone who shares a lot of interesting wisdom about leadership, and he tells a story about a guy who's trying to become a leader in the SEALs organization, and he's got a really quiet voice. And in the military, everything's loud and there's lots of chaos, and you have to be able to project and communicate clearly in that
Yeah,
environment.
yeah.
And he went to that guy and he said, look, you're not going to make it. You're not going to be an effective leader unless you can learn how to overcome this. And what this guy did was he, in fact, found the biggest, loudest mouth on his team and made that guy his human megaphone. And basically, anytime he needed to call out orders, he would basically tap this guy in the shoulder and say, tell them all, move flank left. And this guy would scream, and it worked. So I also want to be, the reason I tell that story, I liked it so much, was it doesn't mean that you need to go from not a good communicator to magically the silver tongued speaker, but you need to understand where you need help. So if you're going to do a written communication and you're not great, maybe written English isn't your first language, find someone on your team, you know, an operator or another leader that you can run it by and say, could you proofread this for me? Right. So it's not just about sort of magically developing behaviors and skills that we don't have. It's understanding the importance of them and figuring out how you're going to add that skill to your behavior without it necessarily being you need to go to a Toastmasters class and become a great orator.
Absolutely, and I think that's critical for leaders to appreciate, recognize, and embrace their gaps, and find the support or help they need. And that's a good segue into my next questions about the different types of leadership personas, right? And a direct question is, what leadership persona do you embody? Because for me, I've had to think about this a little bit. And I realized that I'm sort of the talent champion, where I have gotten really good at understanding my company's needs, and then going out to recruit that help to bring onto the company and then help me grow the company. So I've gotten really good at that. I wasn't always good at it, but I had to work at it. And so that's how I would say, I embody that talent champion. What about you guys? And can you speak to the different types of leadership personas out there?
Sure. I think I've had the privilege of working with a lot of different founders over my career. And if you want to generally bucket certain characteristics, there's the idea generator. The founder has so many great ideas, because on an average day, I couldn't come up with 2 great ideas that I will want to execute on. And so it's so amazing to see someone with that vision and that energy. And then there's that product person that really understands the vertical, the technology or the aspect of the problem you're trying to solve. And for me, my persona has really been the operator. I started as the get it done. You got something in front of you, get it done, get it done, get it done. So.
Oh, great. Sean?
Well, I think for me, I don't have sort of a specific catalog, but if I were to label it with only one term, my style as a leader, it's a teacher. If I hadn't become an engineer, I actually seriously considered becoming a teacher. I going into college, it was sort of my second choice. If engineering didn't work out, and I'm surrounded. My sister's a teacher. My sister-in-law is a teacher. I sort of have this whole community. And when I then did complete my engineering work and began working as a software engineer, I still had that itch to teach. And so I taught at Harvard and I would lecture at different universities in the area just as a way to sort of scratch that itch for myself. And what I started to learn as I elevated in some of these early stage companies as they scaled was that skill had a place. It had a place inside the organization. And so I ultimately reached a place building my last company where offering people the ability to learn and grow on a daily basis was central to our recruiting strategy, our retention strategy. And, you know, at the time was maybe a little insightful. I think now the data from Gallup and others has come out to show that this is what everybody wants. This is what the new generation of employees are hungry for. But it led to exceptionally high retention rates. And it became obviously then kind of core to the mission of what I do today. I will highlight one of the things that you look at some other kind of famous enterprise leaders of the past will talk about some other characteristics, and one of them happens to be my weakness. And so I want to highlight also, it's as important to know what your strength is as to know where you have a shortcoming. Maybe it's reflective a little bit of the Jocko story from a minute ago. But while I am a great teacher and I will drop everything I'm doing to talk to you about the why and the how and different ways to do things and provide lots of coaching and all of that for my team, the flip side is I'm a little bit of an over processor and overthinker. And so I'm not quickly decisive. I like to think on things and work on them. It's my engineering brain kind of playing with the puzzle, trying to figure it out. And that can sometimes be problematic, particularly as a CEO. Sometimes it's better to just act and move forward and course correct as we go. And so one of my two co-founders specifically is very good at counterbalancing that. He regularly will say to me, why don't you just do it today? Like, what exactly are you waiting for? What new information are you going to get? And I often don't have a good answer for that. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. And I just go do it and we move on. And that's the end of it. So finding other personality types that counterbalance or that complement where you may have gaps in your skills is very doable, but it requires, as Christina said earlier, a lot of self-awareness. I'm not saying that to compliment myself. I'm saying it because I just learned by having Wes around that it started to break down this like mild dysfunction I had of overthinking everything.
Yeah, no, that's it makes total sense. But let me touch on that. I'm interested in knowing what are some of the areas where these different personas struggle and where they excel. So particular to you, Sean, being sort of this teacher exploring the why and how, this gap that you talked about, is it specific to this particular persona, or that's something that's unique to you?
I don't think so. I think these are pretty independent behaviors and skill set types. I think it could be that I like to teach and I'm, really aggressive about making decisions and moving forward. And maybe I'm not a great cheerleader. I'm not one who can rally and pump a team up and get them to charge the hill, right? Or it may be that so one of the things that we teach through our programs is communication styles. So if anybody's ever done like a color program, or you can even get it from MBTI and some other things, and you learn we all have different strengths and shortcomings or opportunities for improvement in our skill set. And what's most interesting to me is how those different styles interact with each other. And so one of the ones that is always fascinating to see is oftentimes we'll find on an executive team at a startup, there's one person who leans very much to the like rule breaker, innovator, get it done. And then there's somebody else who's like very checklist, detail oriented. And what's funny is they drive each other crazy, right? There's like so much friction between them. And what the exercise does that's really nice is it gets them to realize they both desperately need each other. Right. Like, and that's just one axis, but I think you could draw that almost any direction. You could have the team where somebody's an awesome cheerleader and they're like, the head of the cheerleading team and they rally everybody and they get everybody excited, but without somebody on the team to be like, yeah, but what are we doing? Like, I don't even, what's the to-do plan? You need, like, I don't understand. It's great. You got everybody all into a frenzy, but I don't understand what the tasks are. Right. So it's always sort of finding those interesting tensions. That's where you can get a little bit of the, as Christina, as you saw, we both kind of reacted to the friction that naturally comes up if you don't understand the differences in those styles. But I think, again, I don't want anybody who's here today, at least it's not my experience, and that's over thousands and thousands of leaders that we've worked with, that anyone is great at all the things. Right. It's really about understanding where your strengths are, what you want to work on, and then what you're going to complement or mitigate and say, hey, that's just not a thing I'm great at. And I've seen amazing leaders who were like, I'm not a great communicator. Like, that's just not a thing I'm good at. So they delegate a lot of that communication. They have the big ideas. and then they figure out how to bring others in to complement those skills. And just one last thought, for folks who are here, even if you forget Christina and I, and just think of some of the most impressive leaders you've seen in the public market, and there's lots of different names that might be popping to your mind right now, and they don't just have to be business leaders, they could be leaders in other domains as well. And if you really think about it, their styles are all different. Every one of them is totally different, and the strengths that they demonstrate, or the challenges that they have, to Maddie's point about Mark Zuckerberg as a public speaker, for example, everybody has a different style, and so it's really important to understand authentically who you are, rather than trying to mimic or mirror someone else that you've seen.
Right.
Absolutely, I think that's well put. And when you were talking about the rule breaker and somebody who's stays on track, I thought you were describing my marriage, because because my wife is the rule breaker. She's very innovative, and I'm extremely risk averse, stay in line, and so it's a good balance. And so I mentioned that because these things don't necessarily have to, you don't have to be in a startup to see this. This works in everyday life too, right? And so leadership is not just specific to running a team or a company. Leadership applies to other things as well. Christina, I would love for you to speak to this, areas where these different personas excel, areas where they struggle, but specific to this operator, right? Do you see any anything that's unique to being an operator where there are these struggles and opportunities to excel?
I'm going to speak for myself, because Sean's right. Every person has so many different facets, and where my weaknesses are, somebody might already have it as an innate strength. For me, in the operator role, you have this overwhelming desire to push past barriers, right? Push hard, push past the barriers, get the stuff done, feel accomplished. And sometimes the challenge there is you forgot to rally the troops. So you're like, well, where is everybody? Or your desire to get it done is so strong that you don't take time to slow down and see what others are feeling, and if they're scared, or if they're like, I'm not sure. Because it's easy to try to, by the sheer force of your will, to get it done. But it's really that your company, your organization, your group, you're doing this together. And to be able to take that time and space to slow down and to say, is everybody here? And are we doing the right things together? That took a lot of practice and learning the hard way.
Yeah. And actually, we got a question from somebody in the audience, and it's actually to your point, being able to recognize the gaps and then seek out help. So this question is, should leaders look for top-level employees who fill your own gaps in leadership styles? And then how do you reconcile the friction and work as one team? And I think it's probably speaking to, some leaders perhaps are, there is an element of insecurity. So I would love for you guys to address this question.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, what I would say, I was going to say, because I think the question was posted as I was talking about some of these different frictions that exist. So I'll say a couple different things. The first one is, while I mentioned that I have a co-founder who's a great compliment to me, I want to be careful. I don't think your only mitigation is to hire people into your organization. You can get this counterbalance or this support from a coach, from peer mentors, from outside resources, partners in life, good friends who are willing to provide you some counsel and some direction. It doesn't need to be a critical factor in recruiting that you're trying to complement different leadership skills. But I do think building that self-awareness and looking for support inside, outside, anywhere you can find it is really important. The friction that can crop up is really a much different, much bigger question. I think there's a lot of things that go into that. Some of that is that natural friction in healthy organizations is always trumped by an alignment of purpose and a goal. So the whole leadership team, the whole company is passionate in pursuing the bigger picture and an outcome. And so what I was describing is actually like maybe the second or third most important thing, which is being aware that you have different styles,
Right.
and that they are valuable and complementary, but that they do cause friction sometimes, and you're going to feel that, and it's going to feel aggravating.
Absolutely.
But I think at a much higher level, it's important to just make sure everybody's on the same page about what the goal is. And as long as you're all pulling in the same direction, while it can seem
Okay.
frustrating, it'll overcome a lot of those feelings of friction.
And sometimes,
Absolutely.
a lot of people stay away from friction or conflict because it's uncomfortable feeling, right? But to have a really high functioning team, you need to get used to having discussions and disagreements and different points of views. Otherwise, you're going to miss a lot of areas that you ought to have caught if you had that, what I quote, psychological safety within your team to be yourself, to express yourself, to really bring what you bring to the table. And so not all conflict is bad. You need conflict, good conflict, to be able to make you and your product and your company make it better.
Yeah, we do a whole workshop for leaders on establishing constructive conflict space inside your organization. And I don't take personal credit for this. There was someone who I hired who had been an executive at Sears Corporation, actually. And he joined our organization. And frankly, I would have worked for him. He's a very bright, very good leader. And he went on to be the CEO of a company after he left our team. But he was the one who told me right up front when I was interviewing for the job, he said, when we are behind closed doors as a leadership team, no one is going to challenge your ideas more. I'm going to question every assumption you've made. I'm going to question everything that you're putting out on the table as a given. But as soon as we make a decision, he said, as soon as you make a decision and we walk out of that room, nobody will be more supportive than me. And so in the room, we naturally generated conflict because, as Christina alludes to, whether it's, iron sharpens iron, or however you want to think about it, this idea that I wanted the best idea to win. I didn't have my ego tied up in it. And so sometimes that friction that we're talking about is just an acknowledgement of different ways of thinking and different styles. And when someone brings a different idea from a different vantage point in, my reaction shouldn't be, gosh, they're really making it hard for me to win this argument. My reaction should be, wow, that's an interesting perspective. I didn't even think of that. What does that do to my thinking going forward? And how do we now evolve together to come up with the best solution?
Curiosity, right?
Yeah,
that thirst. What am I missing?
Absolutely. And I think you could, I tend to look at it, it's easy to label it as friction or conflict, but I also look at it as pre-work, a discussion, an exploration, right? You've got to do those things before you make a decision. So it might not necessarily be friction or conflict. It might be just a discussion, just an exploration. And so I think as a leader, we need to be looking at that for what it is, rather than saying, oh wow, folks are coming in my way, and and so I think that's important. I want to pack 3 questions into one, moving on to talking about these different leader personas. So I'm very interested in knowing, can folks have multiple leader personas, and should they? And how do they determine which one is a good fit?
Okay, I'm going to take a quick stab at this one.
Sure.
Yes, leaders, over time, you will develop different skills. And so if that's a persona, then yes, you should have different personas, because every person that you interact with, they're different. And what their needs are going to be different. So the more you have in your toolbox, the ability to pivot and be flexible and to match your style to what works best for them, or what works better for them, enables you to engage and nurture and grow the team. So you should probably not be stuck in only one persona, but strive to develop multiple personas over time. And it takes time to work on all of these things. And what is a good fit for you? So in people world, we call it covering. So ask yourself the question, are you covering? Are you presenting yourself to be different than who you are, what you're thinking, or how you're feeling? And if you are, and you spend all your energy pretending to be someone else, that's probably
Yeah.
not the best use of your time and energy.
Mhm.
And that does, then if you're covering it, it's probably not a good fit.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that covering notion is very taxing. We talk about
Yeah.
that with our leaders a lot, and
Yeah.
I'll tell a brief story of my own where I did that. I was managing a team of over 100 people, and you know, most of the leaders there had worked for me for quite some time, and I felt like we'd sort of fallen into a rut, and everybody was sort of being a bit lazy and not really putting in their maximum effort, and I didn't know what to do about it. Right? Again, if my natural style is to be a teacher, I don't know what the lesson to teach that day is. And so I tried mimicking what I thought other effective leaders did, which in brief was essentially cracking the whip and like really getting on people. And not only was it taxing for me because it's not my natural style, but it was also super confusing to this team. And it went on for like several days. And finally, in a group meeting, one of them, and to Christina's earlier point, we did have a lot of psychological safety and trust there. One of them finally said, is there something going on outside of work with you? And I said, why? And they're like, you just kind of seem like you've been a giant asshole all week. Like, what is it? And I just realized, like, I wasn't getting the result I wanted. I wasn't acting in a way that was at all natural to me. I was expending all of this energy and nothing had changed on the team. And I told them, I just said, I'm going to be really honest with you. I've seen this lull. I don't really know what to do about it. And so I was just sort of trying some things. And they said, you should have just told us what you were observing. And they expected my natural style in that kind of teacher mindset is to be, you know, an observer and ask them to reflect and tell them what I expected in terms of an outcome. And that would have worked so much better. So I hear Christina's point loud and clear. When I tried it, it was a colossal mess. What I would also say to the second half of the question about how do we find our authentic style, you know, there's a couple things there, right? One is just a natural organic journey that happens over time. I don't know, when I was a first time leader, I would have said to you, I want to be a teaching leader. That's what I'm going to do. I wouldn't have thought of that. It came organically as I've grown in my role. But we do an exercise with newer managers first few years in the role through our program. And I think we don't break it down exactly like this, but for brevity for this group, what I would say is the first thing is seek out feedback. The higher you elevate in an organization, the harder it is to get honest, constructive, growth-oriented feedback. And you need to hunt for it. You need to be asking people in their one-on-ones, like, what's something I'm overlooking right now that I should be more aware of? Or if you had my role, like, what was the first thing you would do differently than the way I'm doing it? And you're always just trying to grasp at opportunities for real, honest, growth-oriented feedback. The second thing, which goes really, you know, pairs directly with that, is I would recommend people set up a regular cadence for self-reflection. I've been doing this for years, and I do it once a quarter. And I just sit down for a couple hours, blacked out on my calendar, and I just think, where should I be exerting myself more? Because it's my highest leverage. It's my biggest opportunity to create value. And where am I coming up short? Where do I have gaps? Where are there things I need to work on? And I get it down to a list of no more than 3 things. And I stick them on a post-it note on my monitor. So I'm constantly reminded, these are the 3 big things. And every 3 months, it's a new list. I'm coming up with new things every time. So that's a way that you can start to explore different parts of your persona as a leader. And ultimately, to give folks here potentially an action item that you could start playing around with today, we have everybody in the program write out this sentence as part of their reflection. I am the type of leader who ... You finish the sentence. And it could be anything. It could be anything from specific behaviors or tactics. It could be about what is your persona or what is the style that you prefer. And then use that as part of your quarterly reflection to say, I said that's the leader I want to be. Am I really embodying that? Am I really demonstrating that on a regular basis? And sorry, I didn't say it out loud, but it's going to be different for every single person who's here today. There's no universal answer to this. We all have our own style.
I think, Sean, the crux of what you're saying is that you intentionally set aside time to do this self-reflection. And I know in a startup world, things move fast. Everything's breaking, or it feels like. You just don't have time to do this. But you need to create that time and that space to do it. Otherwise, you just let the years fly by and you don't even, it's like a zombie land a little bit.
Absolutely. And Sean, I love that you've pointed to the seeking out feedback in one-on-ones or in group sessions, and then this cadence for self-reflection. I have one-on-ones with my team, and they have specific agenda items, and I never. And so this is a learning for me where I need to close out those meetings saying, "Do you have feedback for me? How am I doing? Can I improve?" And so I think a lot of us founders have these weekly one-on-ones or group meetings, but we forget to include that piece onto the agenda. And so that's what I'm going to do moving forward. But these two things that you mentioned, very, very critical to becoming a successful leader, right? Succeeding as a leader. But what are some other external opportunities or help that one can seek out? This is one, you have to set time aside, talk to your team. Are there other external resources or opportunities that a leader can seek out to become more successful or efficient?
Mentors, finding really great mentors, and listening to their stories and experiences. Leverage any sort of coaching that could help you on your journey. And I think, for the external pieces, get yourself to a place where you're comfortable receiving that feedback. We ask for it, but if we're not comfortable receiving it, it's hard to have the external come in to help you do what you need to do. And it's scary. Being a founder, being a leader is scary, and it takes courage. And to be able to dig deep and be like, okay, I'm asking for feedback. I'm genuinely want that feedback. And when I hear it, I'm not going to like it all the time. What am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Sean, any thoughts on that?
I don't know that I have much to add. I think Christina articulated it pretty well, and it reflects my own journey becoming a leader. When I first became a CTO, I ended up getting invited to 2 different CTO lunch groups, and I went to both of them. They were independent sets of people, and I learned tremendously from them. Whenever there's sort of a leadership learning event or opportunity, I would participate in that. I have at various times had a personal coach who I've worked with. If you're newer to the role, I actually think there's a foundational set of skills that every leader needs. You need to understand psychological safety and rapport building. You need to be able to deliver feedback effectively. You need to be able to delegate. You need to be able to manage conflict. There's like a set of these things. And there are lots of different ways to get training and support around those core skills. There's lots of books that have been written. There's online video courses. This isn't meant to be a sales pitch, but companies like ours run training programs that bring leaders together to work on these skills. And I think it's worth making that investment. I think every leader would benefit from that core set of foundational skills. And from there, the leadership journey becomes a little bit more contextual. It becomes a little bit more personalized. It becomes more about your persona, your style. And that's where having some good peers and potentially an individual coach can be really valuable. Once you've got those building blocks, now let's start to talk about how Maddie is going to excel as a leader, not just how do leaders do their job. And you can start to build those additional pieces on. But I think, it's a sad fact that there are a wealth of resources and opportunities out there. And I think it's mostly, to Christina's point, because we feel we don't have time, that we aren't making the investment to seek those things out. And it's hard to rationalize, I understand, but I assure you that, reading one book on leadership every quarter or attending, one workshop every quarter will return meaningful ROI for your abilities and your development as a leader.
Absolutely. And Sean, at the end of this session, I'm going to ask you to put in chat any recommendations for books on leadership. So feel free to feel free.
Yeah. Sorry, Maddie. I actually have a curated library on Amazon, so I'll share that. And everybody, it's
oh my goodness,
150
absolutely.
books. So yeah, I've got it all ready to go.
Perfect. That would be amazing. And so touching on that, there's one question from an audience member from Chelsea. She's asking, how do you recommend finding a mentor? Basically, how do you go about finding somebody that that you want to work with and learn from? Any thoughts?
I think what Sean was doing, joining groups with like skill sets or like career stages, and or just putting yourself in new situations where you're meeting people that could potentially be a good match with you, and not being afraid to ask questions or ask your network. Who do you know that may be a good person I can talk to and seek advice from?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For me personally, as an early stage founder, I make sure that I go out into the ecosystem and meet different people,
Yeah.
right? That I go to events, at accelerators. In past year with COVID, you know, a lot of that was not happening, but I make sure that I go to events, to pitch events, meet with other founders. And so that's how I've been able to honestly recruit my board of directors and find my investors. And so so it's not just finding a mentor, but finding other support for your company as you grow. And so, and a lot of people are out there willing to help. They are willing to put in the work. You just have to ask. Don't be shy to ask, right? Because you might get one or two no's, but you are gonna get a yes, and it's going to be worth it.
And I volunteer Sean because he volunteered himself this.
Well, what I would also add to that is Boston as a community in particular. Actually, you know, look, there's lots of different ways that people can criticize the Boston startup ecosystem, but effort and opportunity are not part of that, right? There are tons of, you know, I with some others run a founder breakfast pre-COVID that we would organize and bring founders together. There are meetups, breakfast, lunches, dinners, book clubs for almost every function. I know I'm personally aware of multiple groups for HR and people operations leaders. There's multiple product management. There's a customer acquisition group. There's multiple engineering leader group. Like, they're out there. So you got to ask, you got to put yourself out there. You got to say, hey, I'm looking for this. Does anybody know if such a thing exists? Because they do. And there are tons of them. Probably the thing we don't do very well is we don't promote and you know, shout those things from the rooftops, but they are out there. The second thing I would say is, over the last 5 years or so, there's been a really interesting explosion of very similar like-minded communities, largely based on Slack, that exist online. So I'm personally a part of like 5 Slack communities just full of leaders talking about challenges, talking about things. So if you're looking for that, and there are specialized ones, there's, you know, one I'm in that's really focused on engineering leadership. There's one that's really focused on sales leadership. And there's one that's really focused on product management leaders. There are lots of communities out there. And for the most part, they're not hard to get into. They are welcoming to anybody who wants to jump in and participate. And there are tons of valuable people there who can offer a lot of support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there were several questions in the chat, but Sean, you have actually responded them to all. So I'm not gonna read them out loud. They were asking about what are some of the events, where to go to find these like-minded people and mentors and other founders. So we have only 15 minutes left, and I really want to touch on this second half, which is supposed to be second half, but we had a wonderful discussion about leadership personas. But I want to touch on things that are important to early stage founders, right? And so, and it's very important. So there's this one issue that early stage founders deal with, and it's important for founders to understand that the pitfalls of when a founder thinks that he or she is supposed to have all the answers, right? When they think that way, what are some of the pitfalls that can come out of that, and they should be looking out for? Can you speak to that?
I was going to use Sean's story as an illustration, that you think you have to do a certain thing and you don't. The pitfall is people see that it's not, you don't know the answers, and therefore it probably will take a bite out of your credibility and what you're trying to do. So I don't know everything, and God forbid, like I should not know everything. And it's okay not to know everything and not have all the answers. And to think that you do and you have to, it puts too much stress on yourself, because realistically, nobody knows everything, not one person.
But it is a very common challenge that's sort of
Absolutely.
rooted in a little bit of imposter syndrome,
Yep.
that like, oh, I'm not sure I'm really ready to lead this group, and a little bit of sort of credibility of your identity, like I'm supposed to be the expert here.
Right.
You know, we teach the trust equation from the Trusted Advisor. Some folks here in the Boston area did the research, and it sort of takes the notion of trust and breaks it down into a simple equation. And part of it is credibility. And what's a little bit of an eye opener for most new managers is credibility doesn't mean you're an expert guru with all the answers. It means that you know when to say, I don't know. It means that you're only going to tell me something if it really is true, not because you're guessing. And it turns out that building credibility and being a reliable leader is just as much about not knowing and admitting that you don't know. But then the next step, which I hope for people eliminate some of that fear of looking weak or like you're not ready to lead or whatever, is to immediately jump to, but let's talk about how we're going to find out. Right. Or I'll get back to you by the end of the day, or whatever it is. Right. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, do you think we should do it this way or that way? You don't just sort of do the, like, I don't know, like that feels very empty and incomplete. Right. But you might actually not know. And so it's okay to say, it's an interesting question. I'm actually not sure what the right answer is. Like, tell me how we might figure out what the, best approach would be. And they say, well, we could run a test and we could see how they perform. And you're like, that sounds great. How long do you think that's going to take? Well, we probably within a few days know. And be like, cool, let's try that. So I didn't know the answer to a question that maybe not even answerable, but and admittedly here, I have to be self-aware enough to go, this is my teacher persona coming out, where I'm like, how would you figure out how to solve this problem? But I think that is my style, is to go there. If you're a cheerleader, maybe your approach is to say, look, I believe in you. Like, I'll trust whatever your call is. Go make it happen. Right. Like there's different ways that we can choose as leaders to approach those kinds of things. But yeah, we spend a lot of time helping people kind of move through some of that. The other one, another variation of this that, we're all told as founders and senior leaders, hire people that are smarter than you, right? It sounds really good on paper, but then once you look around and realize that everybody around you is way better at their job than you are, it's very intimidating, right?
Yes.
So what do you do when they come to you with questions? It can be very overwhelming. It feels very threatening. And this is true for, not even founders or senior executives. You were a member of a team of 5 and you got promoted on that team to manage it. And now you're managing 4 people who look at you as a peer, right? And you don't have all the answers. And they're coming to you and they're like, why did you become the manager? You don't know all the stuff. And so what I recommend for people there is to really find a comfortable place for themselves where the role is not to be expert. The role is to help the team move forward. And so what becomes is, I don't actually know the answer to that, but would it be helpful to you if I went and talked to so-and-so and got the information for you? So now I'm a facilitator. I'm not a guru. I'm not an expert, but I do take on the responsibility of getting the team what they need, getting them the information they need, helping them get to a decision. And I think that can be a safer place for us. So, the heart of your question, Maddie, let's take a scenario like me where I'm the CEO. It technically sort of the buck stops here, right? If people on my team who are in their domains way smarter than me come to me and go, what should I do here? I'd probably follow my teacher persona and say, well, let's talk it through. How would you figure this out? But I also would consider going to, where do you feel like we could get more information on this? Maybe I know somebody. Maybe I can tap my network. Maybe I can run an experiment for you. It doesn't mean I have the answer. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm willing to facilitate helping this person get past whatever that roadblock is. That feels very comfortable to me, and it doesn't feel threatening or like it's undermining my role as a leader.
Right. Because you as a leader, you bring other things to the table than just the answers, right? And I wanted to just point out a observation that, Sean, the way you leaned into these situations was to ask questions, be curious. What can we do here? What can I do here? What would be best for the team? Instead of just, what should we do here? And then immediately have an answer. You scale back and you ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, Sean, saying, "Well, I don't know," is that's not the way to go, right? And so
Mhm.
Right.
so what you describe are best practices in terms of acknowledging that you as a founder or you as a leader might not have all the answers, but are there to support find those
Right.
answers. And I think
Right.
that's yeah, exactly. You also mentioned imposter syndrome. I think that's a real thing,
Hmm.
especially for early stage founders. And I've had to deal with it honestly, especially when I had to pitch to investors, few folks who so I have I'm a founder of a tech company, and I'm pitching to investors who have been in the space for 25, 30 years, and it's quite intimidating. And so I would feel like a fraud and somebody who pretending to know the language learning space, right? And so
Hmm.
um, it is important for founders to confront that, right? What are some other ways to go about that? And why is that important to becoming a effective leader to confront that?
Sean, do you want to take a
I'm
stab
happy
at
to
this one?
speak to it. Yeah, I brought it up because it is something that we see consistently. I would say,
Right.
you know, at least half of all leaders have some experience with imposter syndrome, and it's a kind of a complementary Dunning-Kruger thing, right? Like part of the reason that you feel imposter syndrome is because you realize how hard it is to be a leader, and you can see all the ways in which you can do better. It doesn't
Right.
mean everyone else perceives you that way. It doesn't mean
Yeah,
everyone else is saying like, "Oh, you're really bad at your job." It's largely our own self-doubt and
Right.
insecurity and anxiety about the challenges of the
exactly.
role and our readiness for it. So, because of that, there are two different things that I recommend to people when I'm coaching them. The first one is to understand that someone selected you for this leadership role because they believed in you. They
Right.
saw something and they saw skills that maybe you're not even aware of yet
Yeah.
that you have, or behaviors that you exhibit. So trust in that, even
Mm-hmm.
if it's going to be hard. And even if you are going to stumble, we all stumble, but
Mm-hmm.
trust that that person knew what they were doing when they picked you. The second thing that I like to focus on is to remember, usually when you step into a leadership role, you start getting exposure to additional streams of information and context, not because we're hoarding information, it's just natural. I sit in, 5 meetings a day where some of the same topics are discussed. My individual team members, they're not in any of those meetings, and rightfully they shouldn't be. But now when we come together, I have all that context and all that information. Now, it's a double-edged sword. It also means I need to get very good at effectively communicating and passing down that information so they know what's
Mm-hmm.
going on.
Yes.
But when
Right.
they come back and ask questions, I don't have to feel like I'm not worthy of their questions. I'm the guy who was in all these other conversations. I
Right.
had visibility. So some of this is just natural and structural inside of how communication in most organizations works. Lean on that for confidence as well. So you may not know, the specific question, say I'm an engineering leader, about how to fix a particular bug, but you can definitely speak to the customer why we need to fix it,
Right.
because you're the one who sees all the reports from product management and customer support about what's going on.
And that's
Yeah.
important, having somebody being the node to
Yeah.
understand how all the different pieces fit in. Super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are 5 minutes from the end of the session, and
Oh no.
um, one last question. I really wanna, if I still have just an opportunity to ask this one last question, and I think it's important. It's very, especially to me, because I truly believe in giving back, and so um, uh, as it's important. I believe it's important to giving back is an important element of being a good leader. And so, as a leader, how do you support and nurture others that work for you, right? That's one way of giving back. So how do you go about, because there are many early stage founders who are getting into that role, trying to develop their culture from the get-go, and that's an important piece for them. How can they give back by supporting and nurturing others?
I think make sure that you try to have psychological safety so that you can then open up the space for people to make mistakes, to
Yeah,
take that chance, to try
absolutely.
something they've never done before, and to leverage the internal and external resources that they have to grow themselves. but the most important part as a leader is it's got to be, it can't be a scary place for people, because otherwise they won't want to risk.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And as you were asking the question, Maddie, it almost strikes me that it's almost a hard question to ask because it's literally what we're all about, right? Like my whole business is about helping leaders help their people grow and do their best work. And so it's almost completely internalized in our DNA and our reason for being. That's how we operate.
Yeah.
And so I had to like really pause for a second and think, like, tactically, what does that mean? It means exactly to Christina's point, we have an exceptionally psychologically safe environment, and the practices that go around that of reflection and feedback and all of those things, and blameless retrospectives and all the things that are important. I think the second piece is being really we are anchored in a growth mindset as an organization, not only learning about our business, but learning about each other and how we work together and how we grow as individuals. And then I think there is a really meaningful step, and, look, to not put too fine a point on it, the best organizations 10, 15 years ago figured out how to invent a whole new way to scale up customer acquisition through digital acquisition techniques. And they leapt out ahead of all competition, and it's taken about 10 years for all those playbooks to become publicly known. I will tell you the same thing is happening with leadership and people operation development inside of organizations. There are a handful of companies that are doing this exceptionally well. A lot of it was born out of the Project Aristotle work that Google did several years ago, and the best companies are now out in front, putting money and resources and time behind helping grow their people, even small companies.
Absolutely.
We see it all the time in our business. And not trying to create artificial fear for people, but I will tell you, if you are not meaningfully investing in helping your people grow, you are already behind the curve, and you are going to have a hard time competing.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Sean and Christina, thank you so very much. I truly enjoyed our discussion and conversation. And Justin, I'll pass it to you now.
Sure. Yeah, I'd just like to echo that, Sean, Christina. Thank you guys so much. A lot of really amazing lessons on learning about ourselves through self-reflection and kind of building the support networks that we need. Maddie, absolutely amazing job. Thank you so much for moderating this, and to all the attendees here. Your engagement, your questions really help guide this conversation. So really incredible stuff. I'd just like to say, if you're looking at which sessions you want to join next, or if you might be interested in joining us in the afternoon, click the agenda button at the top. And just a quick reminder, post on social media your favorite quotes, SBW 2021 hashtag, and you'll be entered to win one of 5 $100 gift cards to a local Black-owned Boston business. So with that, we'll let you guys go to your next sessions or the rest of your day. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.